if it like needed constant care from someone constantly, and that person could not give it that care in a reasonable manner without, it infringing on their livelihood, I'd say if it was their responsibility, then I would say it was that person's choice. And if they really, really felt they couldn't look after that person and that person is totally reset, then I would respect the decision to end it, and I don't think they should be criminally liable for that.
So it would be okay to kill an adult in that situation in your mind if
the circumstances made.
We live in a world where there is more access to information than ever before. Generations, young and old, are being exposed to radically different ideologies and opinions every day. It can be so overwhelming, trying to decipher what's true and what's false. But there is a way. Join me as we discuss some of the toughest questions out there about Christianity, the Bible, and culture. I'm your host, Nick Lackey. Welcome to the Garrison.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of The Garrison. Today is a unique episode in that we've never done this before, where I am actually not going to be doing too much of the speaking. And instead, I've got two friends who've been on The Garrison before to come and debate about the issue of abortion. So, to my left, I've got Rei Baker, who was on, I believe, episodes 8, 9, and 10, where we talked about hell and morality. And then to my right, I've got Brendan Malone, who has been on the program before to talk about this issue of abortion. And basically how this episode has come about is Rei listened to this episode with Brendan and wants to essentially have a discussion with Brendan from, the other point of view. And I guess we're just going to see where we get to in our questions. So I'm just going to be, mediating the discussion, and I'll let you guys do most of the talking. But before we get right into the questions, Rei, do you want to quickly introduce yourself in about 30 seconds and let us know what you do?
Sure. So I'm a 20-year-old uni student named Rei. I'm doing a criminal justice degree and a political science degree. I volunteer with the Green Party. I love the Green Party. So that's kind of where I stand. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Rei. And Brendan, what do you do?
Well, I wish I was a 20-year-old university student some days, but I'm the father of 5, married to my beautiful wife, Katie. I run an organisation called Lifenet, and that takes me around New Zealand and Australia. I do a lot of public speaking work. I also have a regular podcast on culture, current affairs, and political issues called The Dispatches, where I come from, the other side of the aisle. I come from an authentically conservative leaning, and I don't mean right-wing. That's not what conservatism is. There's plenty of right-wing people who are not conservatives. They're not trying to conserve anything good, true, and beautiful. And that authentically Christian conservative take on the world and culture and things like that.
Cool. And if you haven't checked out the Dispatches podcast, go ahead and check it out. It's got some great stuff on there. And your YouTube channel, what's that called, Brendan?
Leftfoot Media. Not left of centre, but Leftfoot Media. And we're going to be resurrecting regular YouTube videos actually very soon, specifically on movies and philosophy and ideology, television shows, ideology and art, stuff like that. So yeah, that'll be the focus of that.
Awesome. I can't wait for that. But yeah, if you haven't guessed so far, Rei is going to be coming from the point of pro-choice, as we would call that side, and then Brendan will be arguing more from pro-life. So, gentlemen, let's get into it. The first question, and we'll start with you, Rei.
Sure.
We've got is, at what stage after conception does abortion become wrong, if there is indeed a stage where it does become wrong?
Okay. My take on this is very interesting, but I do think we should start off with a disclaimer, which I know you guys talked about in your episode, that we are both men. I just feel like we have to get that out of the way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I do think men should be able to talk about it, but I think it just should be acknowledged we're not the ones carrying the babies to term. So it's just, we don't carry that weight. I don't really want to talk on the personal experience of women. I don't want to tell women how they feel about it. I just want to speak on the logistics that I think.
Yeah. Well, the ethical question, right? It's we're not going to pretend that we know what pregnancy's like.
Yeah, of course. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. But so the question exactly, when does abortion become wrong, is, I think I'm actually different to a lot of people. I have a unique opinion. I have no idea if that opinion is going to evolve as I grow up. But I would say that once the fetus develops consciousness, me personally, I would call that wrong, to abort it. But that being said, I still don't think if a woman was to choose to abort the fetus after consciousness was developed, unless it was so far in the stage that it was fully viable to be out of the womb, I don't think they should be under any sort of like liability for choosing to do that. But I would advocate they don't do it. But I don't think personally, it should be a criminal thing to do. I think people can judge the woman, they can not like it, and she can deal with those sort of consequences if she chooses to do it post that point. Before that point, I think it's game. I don't think it's wrong. But so there's definitely a difference between me where I think it's wrong and if I think it should never happen. So yeah, that's kind of my opinion on that specific question.
And what would you say, Brendan?
Well, I think any deliberate killing of any living human being, regardless of their age, their stage of development, or where they happen to be right now, in or outside of a womb, for me is always wrong. So I think sometimes what happens in this debate is people confuse things like maybe miscarriage with abortion. In the literature, traditionally, they would talk about spontaneous abortion, and that was a term that was used to describe things like miscarriage, for example. And there can be some confusion around that for some people. They are not obviously what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Abortion is a deliberate action. It's the deliberate ending of the life of the unborn human being. And so I think any action which would deliberately cause the death of another innocent human being is not just immoral, but I think it's gravely immoral. And it's not something that we should ever support, and I think we should really look for more humane and caring solutions to challenges like unplanned or crisis pregnancy. Yeah.
So would you say that life begins, therefore, at conception, Brendan?
Oh, absolutely.
So from that point on, it is morally wrong.
Yeah, that's to deliberately do harm to an unborn human being. Cool. And of course that would have spillover then, because when you think about things like the question of, well, should we do research on embryos? The answer, of course, for me would be clearly no, because you'd be destroying and treating a human person as an object in that situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So are you against IVF, I wonder?
I have opposition to IVF. There's a couple of moral challenges for IVF. One of them is the destruction of human embryos that is involved regularly in IVF. Secondly, there's the big moral question of putting the excess embryos that are not used into a state of frozen stasis, where they're just left there as human beings that we're talking about. And then there's a third component to this, and I think if you understand or have a commitment to a human anthropology, understanding of what humanity is, then your understanding of human sexuality flows out of that, and you would say that the child should be received as a gift or a fruit of self-giving love between husband and wife, rather than a commodity that we might try and bring about through technological engineering of some kind. And so there's what that means is, even though couples who struggle with infertility, they don't mean to make the child a commodity. They love, they desire to be parents. That's a very wholesome and good thing. The process itself it reduces the child to like a commodity or to an object that we can claim as a right. And I don't think you can ever claim another person as a right. So yeah, in a nutshell.
Yeah.
So,
I empathize with that.
Sorry, Ray. The line for you is very clear then. It's conception. If you're deliberately harming the unborn after conception, then it is wrong. So Ray, you were saying before, it kind of becomes wrong when the unborn fetus gains consciousness.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So at what point does that happen?
I mean, it's obviously there isn't a set day, but from what I've read, it's I'm sure Brendan probably knows the details more than me, but it's something like 21, 24 weeks is what I've heard. Yeah.
Around that point,
So yeah, that's what I would say. I just personally cannot grasp what is, like, logistically in reality is wrong with terminating it before that point. Because I totally understand that from a Christian worldview, especially if you visualizing, a soul being created at that point of conception, I totally get why it would be horrible to get rid of it. But, without that idea in mind as a non-Christian, I just can't see where the wrongdoing is, because I get that you can use the words, it's living, I'm not here to say, oh, it's not living. I'm not here to say, oh, it's not human, because to me that's like subjective. Sure, it's living. Sure, it's human. But sure, someone could make the case it's not. Like, I'm not concerned with that necessarily. But I definitely don't think it's a person before that point. And I think if there was a line to be drawn of when it gains personhood, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, it's when it comes out the womb, because there's just, it's just a logistical nightmare there.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely at the point of consciousness.
So if you lack consciousness like a child does early in the womb, you don't think there's personhood present?
Not yet.
So what about at night when you sleep, or if you're in a medically induced coma when you don't have consciousness, you don't have self-awareness in those states, do you cease to be a person?
If you're in a coma, a forever coma or whatever those are called,
Like a medically induced coma, let's say it was something they were going to put you in it for a month or two to heal a brain injury.
Now, obviously,
or something like that,
you have a continuity of identity. So you have an identity up to that point before the point of that coma, and then you go into the coma, and then you're going to get out of it. There's no continuity of identity before that point, so that's where the difference lies for me there.
Okay, so let's just change the scenario a little bit, because you're not alone in arguing that philosophical position.
Of course.
What if there is no continuity of identity? So what if you've had a serious brain injury, like an adult human being has had a serious brain injury in a car accident, and the doctors have said, look, they have lost all their memories, their ability to speak, their ability to even reason, but they'll be in a coma for 3 months, they'll come out of it, and they'll learn all those things again. Would it be okay to end the life of that person?
So essentially it's starting from scratch.
Yeah, so they're in the same state now as an unborn human being, a fetus in a womb. Would it be okay to deliberately end the life of that adult in a coma?
That is a rough one. And I'm obviously not going to act like I have all the answers. Obviously my opinion could change. But I definitely don't... I mean, I wouldn't personally advocate for it, but I couldn't necessarily grasp the like if I don't know, I just don't think there's like would there be a good reason, like someone might have to...
Are you saying you have an instinct that it wouldn't be the right thing to do even if you can't quite articulate? Is that what you're saying?
Well no, I'm thinking I need to think about it more.
Yeah, sure.
So is it essentially going to be a baby again? Like, is it going to have to learn to talk and
it's
stuff?
effectively in the same state. It'd be an adult, but it's going to have to relearn language. It's going to have to learn those cognitive abilities again. Doesn't have any past memories. They're gone. They can't be recovered. Obviously, this is a thought experiment.
If it can be alive and it's fine, and like it's not going to be a massive stress to someone's life, because the difference is, so there's no one carrying that person in a womb, and potentially there won't be someone that needs to look after it, or I shouldn't say it, the person. So that makes it way different, and I would say probably not. But if it like needed constant care from someone constantly, and that person could not give it that care in a reasonable manner without it infringing on their livelihood, I'd say if it was their responsibility, then I would say it was that person's choice. And if they really, really felt they couldn't look after that person, and that person is totally reset, then I would respect the decision to end it, and I don't think they should be criminally liable for that.
So it would be okay to kill an adult in that situation in your mind if
the circumstances...
So because what I'm hearing is it sounds a little bit like your position has changed to just a little bit now from... It's not really so much about consciousness. It's actually about now like viability and bodily needs and bodily rights. Is that where you've landed?
Well,
or are you saying it's both?
I have lots of different views. So I'm not only like talking about the rights of this whole thing because of consciousness. There's also other factors for me. Sure. So yeah, I mean, it's all interconnected in my view. Yeah. So yeah.
So because my response would be that if you wouldn't do a certain thing outside of the womb, it wouldn't be considered humane or moral to do that to a human being. Why would we do that to a human being inside a womb?
Because the circumstances are just so different.
And that's what obviously that's what we're trying to get to. And I think, like you've articulated already, you don't think you are a person until you've got consciousness. And I would argue that the only reason you can develop consciousness is because you develop into it. It's not something we give you from outside. It's because you already are a person. If you're a plant, you will never be and develop consciousness. If you're an animal, you won't develop that human consciousness either.
Sure.
It's only a human being. So you first have to be a human being. So I think the personhood is not determined by an arbitrary criteria like that. I think your personhood is what gives you those various criteria.
Sure. Well, here's an analogy I've heard. So I'll see what you say about this. Sure. I have no idea. And you've probably heard this maybe. But let's say we chop Nick's head off. I know that's violent, but and then we put
Nick's not into
Nick's
this.
head on a robot body, so he
Yeah.
gets a robot body, and then put a robot head on Nick's body. We're gonna say which one is Nick. Obviously, we're gonna point to the one with the robot body because what we value in the person is its consciousness. That's where we see its identity. Before it has that at all, it's not necessarily in our eyes a person. We don't see this AI Nick with Nick's body necessarily as a person. We just see it as a robot with Nick's body, even though like majority of its mass is Nick.
Yeah, I would disagree though, because I think what you would have is in that situation, which obviously is total fantasy because we couldn't do that, right?
Yeah.
But let's say we could. In that situation, you would now have a piece of machinery, whatever that shape that takes, that actually has been attached to Nick's body. And the mere fact that even you're calling it Nick's body is still a recognition that there is a person and that this body is part of their personhood. Do you know what I mean? Like
Sort of. I'm saying it's Nick's property, but I kind of, in my view, I'm seeing it as like it's Nick's head's property. Like Nick's head kind of owns this body because it was his, or it still is.
But why
his.
is Nick's head the difference? Because if you're talking about consciousness, and you're saying, well, that's like his head's part of his body as well. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
So consciousness is something immaterial. It's not.
I suppose.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so the question is, why is his head not considered just a piece of property as well, in a sense? And I think for me, even the fact that we're talking about Nick's body is clearly an indication that his body is fundamentally part of who he is. Like, even if something else is taken on his body, it's not just a random piece of
Sure, but
property.
would you hang out with Nick's body or Nick's head?
I don't think I would. I don't think
What do
that's
we
relevant.
value?
Like,
What do we value?
But
in that scenario?
But in that situation, I guess the question would be, how clever is the AI? Like, is it able to commune on top of his
Right,
body?
but if you want to hang out with Nick, like it doesn't.
Yeah, I would argue that doesn't change whether or not it doesn't. That has no bearing on the questions we're talking about. I don't think. So I think what I mean is whether a person said, well, I really feel like hanging out with Nick's body with an AI head on it because I find that more
that wouldn't be
interesting.
hang out with Nick though.
But, well, it's hanging out with part of Nick, isn't it? Surely.
It's hang out with Nick's body. But if you
But-
want to hang
and
out
what
with
is
Nick, we're
Nick's-
talking about his continuity of identity, his being, his consciousness. That's what we are valuing. If you could save, if like one of them was going to die, I'm sure you would save Nick's head with the body.
Yeah, I think so. Part of the problem with this thought experiment is I think it's probably getting away from the core fundamentals. But going back to it, I would say that it doesn't have any bearing on the question of whether or not consciousness is what makes you a person. Like, we've done something very
but it's
artificial
what
to
we
a natural
value.
process there.
It's what we value in a person. It's talking about what human beings we look at and say, okay, that is a person, that's a human, that's something I value.
There is no consciousness without the body. So you have
Sure.
to value
Well,
the body. So to say I value a consciousness is an abstract, arbitrary concept that doesn't make sense without a body. Do you know what I mean? Because I can't value your... How do I know your consciousness and your personality and all those ethereal things? By being in a room bodily with you, you're bodily present with me. That's how we do that.
Yeah.
So I can't at that point value your consciousness if your body is just nothing more than a meaningless piece of property. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Well, so essentially what I'm getting is the analogy is too unrealistic to sort of be a proper comparison.
Well,
no.
I think though that what I'm getting at is that in actual fact, if you just say that we only value a person for their consciousness, that's not correct. We don't. We value them for so much more than that.
Well, we can.
And we cannot. What is consciousness in reality without a body? There is no manifestation of consciousness in the real world there.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying Nick
Do you know what
has
I mean?
nothing, like absolutely no body. I'm saying he still has a head.
Poor old Nick Sydney.
He still has a head, you know. So
Yeah,
he still has a body. He has a
Yeah.
robot body. So he still has a body. It's just a new body.
Yeah,
So he still has a body.
yeah.
It's just fully manufactured.
Can I dive in here? As
Sure.
much as I'd love to continue talking about getting my head chopped off and turned into a robot,
Yeah.
I think we should move on to this next question, which is somewhat related. And it's, how do you reconcile personal autonomy and the rights of the unborn? Because I think all of us in this room would recognize that human beings have life, have value, and also that we have personal autonomy. And so often the phrase which goes along with this is my body, my choice. So starting with you this time, Brendan, how would you respond to the whole my body, my choice phrase and the idea that do you believe that we do have full personal autonomy?
No, I don't believe personal autonomy is ever absolute. It never has been absolute. I think that's a liberal distortion. And it came from Enlightenment liberalism, and it flowed through liberal political philosophy as well. It puts the autonomous self-choosing individual really at the centre of everything, and personal choice as the highest good. I don't think that is, not only do I think that is extremely problematic for society, because you can't have a society if we're all just going to live that way and view ourselves that way. Think of like the COVID lockdown. Imagine if everyone just said, well, no, my body, my choice. We'd have anarchy, right? So there's plenty of moments you can think of where, in actual fact, that would be disastrous. But not just that, I think it's also discordant with reality. Like the notion that I am totally, fully independent in that way, like I don't bring myself into existence. I can't survive when I'm a young child without the body of other people, or if I'm older, or if I'm sick, or I have a disability. I can't flourish without the bodies of other human beings. I can't fully become human unless I know at least one other person to call friend. And I can't really flourish without community, where I interact with people and they sort of draw me out of myself and show me the full scope of human horizon. So I think that whole core philosophy is problematic right from the get-go. But in this particular case, there is such a thing as, and I think there is a legitimate and very good form of, an appropriate form of bodily autonomy. The notion that, like, I couldn't just take your body, right, and do whatever I wanted to with it. That would be immoral, but it stems from the fact that you have profound human dignity, and it's never right to do that to a sacred thing like a human person. So in this case, there is a thing called bodily autonomy, and there are legitimate limits, though, to what we can do with our body. And I think the fundamental principle of bodily autonomy is you can never deliberately do something to another person's body that they haven't actually given consent to. And if that is the case, then you can never deliberately destroy the body of an unborn human being because they haven't ever consented to that. So straight away, the bodily autonomy principle doesn't actually support abortion, I would argue. And that's also taking into account that when you have a pregnancy, there is a body inside another body. That is not the typical situation. It is unique. And it does create, there is certain limits. Again, this is where reality kicks in with autonomy doctrines. There are certain limits on autonomy. An unborn human being doesn't have the right to freedom of association because they just can't leave, Like, there are obviously limits and differences, but the fundamental difference, their life, no one has the right to deprive them of that deliberately. And to do so would be a violation of the principle of bodily rights. So,
yeah. And what do you think, Ray? Do you think that the personal autonomy argument is a good enough reason to allow abortion?
I don't think, if that was the only argument about it that existed, if it was simply just, I can choose what I want to do, so I'm going to do it. Like, if it was literally that simple, I would probably say I don't know if I would say it's good enough, honestly.
Does it have an impact on it, though? Is it part of it?
Yeah, of course.
So
I totally think it is.
And that part of the argument,
I'm sure you would say it has some sort of impact.
In pregnancy, you mean? Or on abortion? I don't think it has any
both.
bearing. I don't think it has any bearing on the morality of abortion, but it definitely has a bearing on when you're making medical decisions, and there are certain realities at play because you've got two competing interests so closely aligned in that situation. Yeah, but it doesn't change the fundamental right that you don't have a right to deprive someone of their body without consent.
I just have the very expected basic view that if you don't want to be giving your resources to this thing that hasn't developed consciousness, that will never know it was aborted, will not even experience pain necessarily at that point. I know that's probably contested, but even if it did experience pain, I would still.
It can experience pain from, we don't know the exact period, but certainly from the later stages of pregnancy, you can definitely.
Well, yeah, of course. Whenever I think about the pain specifically, I know this is kind of silly, but I just think about the millions of animals we're slaughtering every day and just think like, okay, I just don't really think it matters in the grand scheme of things personally.
I would argue pain is irrelevant to the morality of an action. Like if I can do something immoral to you but you don't feel it, you don't feel suffering because of it, that doesn't mean my immoral thing. Like if I could enslave you somehow in a way that you didn't feel suffering, that still wouldn't make the enslavement right, you know?
Yeah, sure. I'm not saying it's right because they wouldn't feel pain or not. I just think I view the fetus as one with the mother. Like it is interconnected with the mother. And again, I just fundamentally do not see the issue with getting rid of it. Like
so there's definitely a profound and wondrous communion between the mother and the unborn child. There's no doubting that.
Sure.
You're absolutely right about that. But they aren't one and the same, though. I mean, from conception, it has its own unique DNA. So we know it's not part of her body because it's got its own unique DNA signature. And obviously, you know, we don't describe a pregnant woman as having like 4 arms or 4 legs, you know, because we recognise, no, there is a different body in here.
Sure.
But you're right. The intimacy of that there's not quite any other type of intimacy like that. However, there is some very clear parallels, I think, when you get outside of a womb. An unborn child, right up until somewhere between 12 and 24 months of age, doesn't have self-awareness. It has basic consciousness, but not self-awareness. And it relies totally on the body of its mother or its father or another human being to stay alive. And if that bodily donation is not given, it will die very quickly. So, but we wouldn't say, again, outside of a womb, it's okay to kill it because it lacks full consciousness. It hasn't developed self-awareness, and it relies on the body of another. So I think if you wouldn't do it there, why would you say it's okay inside of a womb? That's my ethical frame.
When I'm imagining inside the womb, I'm kind of imagining like we got the building blocks, it's building up. It's not completed. I don't really think if humans were to have a completed state, to me, I wouldn't call it like when you're 25 or whatever, you're at your peak. I would say like a human is complete when it is viable outside of the womb. I know it still needs to rely on a mother, but a human is complete when it's been created in the womb. The way I kind of view it is it's completed when it's outside the womb. At that point, it's complete. It's begun its continuity of identity. It would be wrong to kill it at that point, and it has human rights there.
Why outside of womb though? Because all you've identified there is a change of location. Like it's inside
because
of womb,
it's
now
finished.
It's outside.
Because it's been completed and it's started its continuity of identity.
Okay, so 2 questions strike me straight away. Number one is the question of what about the fact that it hasn't actually completed its development? So, for example, brain development is not completed for that child until the age of 25, around 25, a couple of years younger for females. We also know that it hasn't developed self-awareness yet. That will come potentially up to 2 years later afterwards.
I'm aware
and then it hasn't developed the ability to form sapient, so abstract thoughts for some years later after that. So there's still lots of development to come. So that's the first question. And the second question is, doesn't this kind of contradict what you were saying earlier where you said that consciousness was the point at which you felt
I feel it's wrong, but I think if a woman chose to have an abortion for whatever reason, obviously I would really hope it's a good reason after to develop consciousness. I would not want them to do that. I would advocate for them not to do that. Yeah. But if they chose to do that, I basically just don't think they should be under criminal liability for it. I think it's so much different to murder or whatever. And I think the consequences they deal with from that should be, the natural consequences they receive. It shouldn't be a legal issue there. That's what I think on that specifically. But about the outside of the womb development, I just think human development is. This is just my personal view. I'm not trying to say like every pro-choice person thinks this, but I think human development is arbitrary. I feel like I'm going to be developing until I die. Like I'm going to be learning new things until I die. I think. When I imagine, I obviously read this somewhere, but it is like how I feel. When I imagine the fetus inside the womb, I do imagine it is a building being built. And so when I imagine aborting it, it's kind of just like knocking down a quarter built building, we're not taking a full building and getting rid of it, which was how I would visualize something that is viable outside the womb. I would visualize you're getting some pieces that haven't been put together and you're getting rid of them. And I wouldn't call getting rid of those pieces equivalent to knocking down an entire building because the building doesn't exist yet.
So the difference I would say there is, one is, again, I still think that's a contradictory position because even outside of a womb, according to that analogy, there's still plenty of pieces that are not present there. So it's not complete yet. And secondly, I think this is the more problematic aspect. I think this is a view that treats the human person like an artificial object, where like this laptop in front of us, it's not actually a complete laptop if it doesn't have a hard drive and a motherboard and a screen. You know, if you've only got 1 or 2 bits, you don't have a laptop. You've just got a paperweight.
Yeah.
But a human person, that's not what they are. We don't add from outside to make them a human person.
Oh, we kind of do.
Well, no, we don't do any adding.
Well,
They are self-directed. They flourish in their own growth. The reason you develop once you're outside of a womb into the next stage, like self-awareness or your full brain development, is because you flourish into it. You already possess that potential within you, and you enter into it as you get older. And if we were to do harm to you, we would be actually doing harm to you, you know, and depriving you of that development. But you're not an artificial thing. So I would argue that you are actually a complete person before you develop into consciousness, before you even get out of a womb. And I think that's because you're not an artificial thing. Oh, sorry. You don't have to add things to you from outside to make you a person, because you already have that capacity sitting there waiting to be lived. And if we don't harm you in a womb, you'll start doing those things.
Yeah, I empathize with that because, I mean, I totally understand how the unique DNA sort of argument of that kind of sets like a destiny of the fetus. It's like, okay, so as soon as conception happens, they've got the unique DNA, and it's kind of like they have a destiny of exactly what they're going to look like and how they're going to be and stuff. But the way I see it from that specific angle is, if you abort the fetus, its destiny was never that it was never going to exist, because it never will have existed because it was aborted. And I don't see it as any different to any other sperm and egg that would have created any other unique strand of DNA, because it's now has the destiny of all those other sperm that didn't make it.
So that in that case though, so obviously there is a biological difference between the gametes, the sperm and the egg, and an embryo, a zygote, a fetus, a human being. So one is a human being, the other is just human DNA. That literally is part of someone's body. Right. So there's a big difference there. And secondly, what if someone did that to you though after you were born? Or even now, they said, well, look, I killed him, but it's okay because he was never going to get to the next stage of development because I killed him. Do you know what I mean? That doesn't really make a strong case.
If I was killed in the fetus, I obviously wouldn't care because...
No, but what if I did that to you now? Wouldn't those same conditions apply?
No. They wouldn't apply because it's so different.
But didn't you just say that if someone aborts you, then you were always going to be aborted?
Well, yeah, sure.
But wouldn't that be true if someone commits homicide on you at 20?
If someone commits homicide on me when I walk out of this church, then it was destined to happen, obviously, and it is what it is. But
would it be okay for them to do that?
Well, yeah, no. I mean, obviously
Why not?
Because you're ending my continuity of identity without, you're breaching my supposed human rights that I believe I have. But Can
I pause before you do that and say that? That's just briefly. That's exactly what I believe abortion does.
Sure.
So we're in agreement on the principle, but the boundaries of where that is.
Well, because I just don't I think I don't know what your opinion is if it was removed from Christianity, and I know that's kind of impossible to know because we're not ever going to know that. But I totally understand if a soul has also been created at that moment, then totally get it. If I believe that, I would totally agree. But I just believe what exists before consciousness.
Can I answer that question?
Sure.
On the question of ensoulment, that's a specific theological question, and different religions have different theological positions on that. I mean, I am of the Christian faith, and there are clear... In fact, there have been debates within Christianity about that specific question. But I'm not actually... That's not the issue I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Like it's, for me, that's a separate religious question.
Sure.
To the primary question of how should we treat any human being that is alive and innocent.
Yeah, I get that. But it is something you do believe, even if separate, I assume, right?
Yeah, I do have beliefs on that, absolutely. Yeah. But those beliefs, I could take those beliefs right out of the picture.
Yeah. I get that.
And I'd still be pro-life.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I totally do. But I just think it's definitely intertwined in some way. But
could we reverse that and say possibly if you have, I'm not sure what your religious or not religious beliefs are, but perhaps your philosophical materialistic view of the world is also corrupting. Do you know what I mean? So
everything influences everything, right?
Yeah.
So
the question is which bias is true or which one is not.
So all I'm saying is, from my perspective, I do kind of see it in that materialistic ways in which I see it has a potential destiny, but I don't see it as a thing that necessarily, absolutely needs to be protected if it's not what the mother wants, because I don't really see.
Can I ask a question related to that? Why then would destiny outside of a womb? Why would that your destiny? So that you're born or you're 20. Why is all of a sudden destiny actually something that we should value? Surely that implies something more sacred that you think is worth valuing.
Well, this is kind of getting into the third question. So in a way, but because I believe in laws in the sense of a social contract. So I think we have a social contract and we don't want that to be infringed. And I think you become a part of that social contract when your building is constructed and completed, which I visualize as when you are viable outside of the womb. So,
So on that point, why then would we charge someone, like we've done in New Zealand, this has happened several occasions recently actually, where we have charged someone criminally for killing an unborn human being in a car accident, for example, like a drunk driver who's done that. What that implies surely that they are actually part of that social contract.
Sure, but that is there's a lot of things I could say about that, but the first thing that comes to mind is what we've done legally, I'm not like taking I believe in the concept of a social contract, but I'm not necessarily talking about the actual laws we have. So I'm not saying like, our laws are supreme or anything like that. So that would be my initial reaction.
Can I jump in here just for the sake of time? We might move on to the third question, and this is the final one. And it's, what is the long-term effect of criminalizing abortion versus legalizing abortion, and what are the effects on the nation as a whole? But I also want to focus on the woman involved, because that is a big focus in the abortion debate. What are the effects of freely allowing abortion like we do in this country? It's not maybe not in every single case, but it's compared to the rest of the world, we're very liberal about access to abortion. So what are the effects on the woman, and does that play into the rightness or wrongness of it?
Well, I don't want to speak specifically on the effect on women directly, because I think it's different for every woman. And what happens with abortion, what happens with having a child, it's different for every individual woman. So I don't want to speak on that specifically, but it's pretty obvious what my opinion on criminalizing or just banning abortion would be. Obviously, I just think it would be disastrous. So I'd like to hear what you have to say about that sort of thing. Yeah,
I actually, this is such a broad question, because when you talk about the effects, if you're a liberal, then you're going to think, what about the effects on the individual? I say, what about the effects on the community, on society as a whole? That I think that has to be considered.
Yeah, of course.
And I also think you've got all these other people in the equation that we don't consider. The fathers, for example, assuming they're not like some sort of criminal who has sexually assaulted someone, or they're not a deadbeat dad who's abandoned you. They actually want to be part of the child's life and they deprive that. There's all these other effects as well. But I think basically, in a nutshell, that the supposed negative consequences of criminalising abortion, we know the data is clear. They have absolutely been overstated, and falsely so, by certain pro-choice advocates over the decades. The claims that you'll have all these illegal backstreet abortions and lots of women will die. We know those numbers were absolutely wildly overinflated. We've got more recent data showing that in actual fact, where countries have gone from restrictive to liberalised, that hasn't actually resulted in better outcomes necessarily for women. It's often gone the other way. There's lots of competing data on that particular point. I will say this though, I think that your laws should be really responding to the question, what goods are worth having and at what price? Is the good of human life so good that we would say it's sacred and it must be protected? And if so, shouldn't we protect all human life, not just some classes of human life? And if we do in our law uphold human life as being so sacred, therefore it's never legal to deliberately end the life of an unborn human being, we're not talking about miscarriage, we're not talking about accidents, we're talking about deliberate ending of life, then surely the positive benefits for society would be profound. Our view of the human person would change. The way we practice medicine would change. We wouldn't just default to abortion. We'd try and find more life-saving techniques when we're in those difficult situations, etc., etc. And then congruent with this, and I think this is important, people often talk about the legal status without recognising that in actual fact for a pro-lifer, we don't just want to see a law change, we want to see a cultural attitude shift as well. So we want to see a complete shift where we say, let's stop putting women on a speedy pathway towards abortion. Let's stop making them subject to these inhumane and just sort of barbarically calculating market forces where they're told, all right, no abortion, you're on your own. Survive economically somehow. No, let's restore community back into their lives. Let's care for them. Let's do what we can. Let's provide better systems. One great example of this in America, actually prior to Roe v. Wade, they got very close to this apparently, but it never crossed the line because there was a massive shift after Roe v. Wade and how things played out. But was they were working on a policy for federal health insurance for unmarried mothers. So you found yourself pregnant, and this automatically you would have access to this federal health insurance that would cover the cost of all of your pregnancy-related medical bills and all that sort of stuff. So that's a practical example of a good policy that, you know, so you wouldn't just say, let's ban abortion. You would say, we need better solutions and we need a law which reflects the reality of the sacredness of human life. So to me, it's always both and. That's what I feel.
I mean, I love that idea of the pregnancy benefit. Yeah, that sounds phenomenal. Like, I think that's something that should be implemented probably, even with the legalization of abortion. But I think, because when looking into you, I did find you talking about the data a bit and how, and your opinion on what would happen if we criminalized abortion. So it's pretty impossible for us to agree if we think the consequences would be very different. But obviously, you know, it's pretty simple from my perspective. I do feel like pregnancy-related deaths would go up. I do feel like unsafe abortions would skyrocket. I feel like a lot of lower socioeconomic children would be born into the world, and it would have a negative effect on pretty much everything. Obviously,
Can I challenge that particular point?
Yeah, sure.
Because I'm one of those children, and I don't look at my life as a burden or a curse.
Sure.
Right? We're a very poor family, welfare class family, and so I look at back on my childhood. It was just great joy, and it never crossed my mind, I don't want to be here.
Totally.
So to me, again, I think these are social problems that we actually have a responsibility to address, and to work on rather than eliminate the people who might experience
totally.
suffering.
And I've always been giving philosophical questions all my life, and something people have asked me is like, would you rather live a life of torture or no life at all? I'd say I'd rather live a life of torture. So I agree with you there. But I've lost the exact point I was trying to make on that.
You think it would be worse? There'd be a whole lot of negative outcomes.
Yeah, there would be a whole lot of negative outcomes. I had a specific thing, but I've just totally lost it.
Can we mitigate those outcomes, do you think,
yes,
by
of
better
course.
actions? So in other words, if we could mitigate...
yeah, of course we can mitigate them.
Then why wouldn't we do the right thing?
Because I don't think... Okay, here's the thing. Here's what I was coming to. I've remembered it now, I guess. I think this is what I was going to say. And that is, I just think all these solutions you have once we've criminalized abortion, they're just kind of a pipe dream, or they just don't feel too realistic enough or feasible enough, at least immediate. Like, obviously we're not going to criminalize abortion right now, but I'd say if we could live in some insane utopia where we did have all those benefits, like it was everything, all of this was pretty much as perfect as it could be, then at that point, maybe I could entertain being pro-life. It would still be heavily considered. But if every single institution was set up in support of the woman and all that, then it would be a lot harder for me to choose what side to be on. But you're basically saying, like, we need to do this, we need to criminalize abortion, but we need all these other things as well. And at least right now in society, especially, if we were to criminalize abortion right now, which I'm sure you two would like overall, I definitely think it would have more disastrous consequences.
Can I engage? I don't think you need utopia, and I think also what you seem to be suggesting there is not that you would want this, but I think what the underlying problem with that is that you're effectively saying, well, we should keep abortion because it would be too hard to actually improve the lot of women in life. I'm saying, no, let's do both and I also think if we'd adopted that stance, because similar arguments were being made around this time, a couple hundred years ago, we would have never outlawed slavery, because the same principle arguments would apply there. Oh, it's utopian, our economies will collapse, people claimed, and people said, well, what are we going to do with all these slaves? You can't outlaw slavery, they'll have no jobs, things like that.
Yeah.
So I think there are certain goods that are so important, we call them sacred, human life, being right up there, that you've just, to not take action is not acceptable. You can't, and I don't think that's utopian. I don't think it's some sort of weird arbitrary thing that we're talking about here when we talk about a human life and their value and what should be allowed to be done to them or not. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the fundamental difference really is, at the end of the day, that when I think about a fetus and when I think about laws and morality and what we ought to do, I mainly do, because, here's what I should have said probably at the start. I am a non-cognitivist, which basically means I don't believe there is an objective morality. I don't think there is anything objective, like any true, there's evidence that if I drop this glass, we can measure that gravity is going to make it fall and hit the table. But I don't think there's anything truly in reality, as a non-Christian. I know you guys obviously don't disagree. Do disagree. But that I don't think there's any true law thing out there saying torturing innocent people is bad, even though pretty much 99.99999% of humans are going to think that's bad. I think we as humans operate on essentially what is a social contract. We all come together as community, as humans, as smart beings. We decide what we want, what we don't want to happen to each other, what we want to happen to each other, and we develop rules around that. And so I think if someone is to say torturing innocent people is wrong, what I visualize them saying is torturing innocent people for fun. I think that is wrong. I think everyone's just expressing their opinion. I think it's wrong. And if every single, or 99.999% of people on Earth think it's wrong, then democratically we should make it within the social contract to be considered wrong. But I don't think things are objectively right or wrong ever. So when I think about these things like abortion, I'm thinking totally from social contract. And when I think in that way, I think, okay, I wouldn't care if I was aborted as a fetus, especially before consciousness, therefore I have no social contract obligation in that sense.
Two questions arise. What if enough people decided and voted that they're okay with slavery or reducing women to chattel, and they said that's just part of the social contract? Should we accept it or should we protest it?
Well, everyone that wants to protest it can protest it, and we can.
Would you protest something like that?
I would protest slavery, of course, because I'm just expressing my opinion.
Yeah, sure, but why would you protest slavery? Because that implies
because
slavery,
I don't like it.
Exactly, but it implies that slavery has some binding moral claim that would invoke and should invoke protest, right?
Not really. It just shows that my life experience up to this point make me not like slavery, and it makes everyone else who's protesting also not like slavery.
Sorry, one other thing. Obviously that would have bearing. If there is no objective truth, then none of your beliefs or statements are true either. They're just...
Well, it's opinion. It's all opinion.
Yeah, but the question is that if it's all opinion...
obviously apart from fact, when we're talking, or measured things.
So obviously, empiricism in and of itself... seems to be empiricism that you're leaning towards, or something. I'm
empiricism. Not familiar with that term.
So the only things that are empirically provable should be considered true?
I don't know. In one sense, yes, but in the other sense, no. I know if I drop this glass, boom, gravity. But what if in 1,000 years we realize, wait, it wasn't gravity, it was this other thing. So I think we can try to know, and we can be 99.99% sure on most things. And if we can measure something, we can measure it and say, we have measured this to be gravity, and that is gravity. But when we're talking about moral things, I don't think there's anything that can confirm.
So what I'd say is that claim you've just made there, though, about only measurable things, etc. Assuming we know it's all true, right? That is not a material, measurable claim. That exists in here, basically, or out there, if you like. So that's a principle that you're invoking, and a principle is not a material thing that we can measure like the dropping of a glass.
Sure.
So straight away, that even on itself, it's like self-refuting that position. But the bigger question for me I was going to get to was, why would the social contract count then? The social contract doesn't mean anything because it's just a principle again.
Exactly. Well, I think everything's just...
So how can we have society? To me, that unravels at that point.
Because in the way I see it, we have society right now, and it's all happened without an objective morality.
But that's not correct, though. It has absolutely... The reason we have a structure and order to our society the way we do is precisely because of a belief that something outside of us, something sacred, has given us a set of... Yeah, has given us a set of... But it didn't order itself. It's ordered according to that outside transcendent thing. It's not imminent. It didn't arise out of nothing. So when you just say we have society, it's just happened. It hasn't actually just happened in the sense that it just evolved. It's a process of looking to sacred transcendent laws. So for the West, quite clearly, the Ten Commandments, the Beatitudes that are found in the New Testament, things like that are our clear... So much of our law, in fact, like you're studying law, the idea of separation of branches of government and law, that goes right back to the Old Testament system where the priests had an authority and they held the law. The king, the Jewish king, had a different authority and they couldn't ever override each other. They kept accountability. Sure. These are ideas that actually didn't just come out of nowhere. Do you know what I mean?
I don't think they came out of nowhere. That's why I don't think they're objective. I think they came from somewhere. I think they're rules people followed, and I don't think they're objective. They came from somewhere. I don't know where they came from, but they definitely, because as a non-Christian, I don't believe there is, a sacred text that tells us exactly what we have to do, or what we have to follow. I just think we as humans are figuring that out.
Can I say two last things?
Sure. I'm enjoying it.
This is great.
Keep going.
But the two things I'd say is, number one is you are speaking as if you do believe things objectively. I'm not. You're enunciating ideas. Like when you say there is nothing objective, that's an objective claim. That's a claim
that's not. Is it a moral claim? Because I'm talking about things can be objective, but moral claims I don't think can be objective. And again, I said before, when I'm saying slavery is bad, or anyone saying slavery is bad, from my mind, that's me saying I think personally that slavery is bad. So if I do say something like that, if I say abortion is fine, I'm not saying morally abortion is fine. I'm saying I think morally.
Yeah, and so on that point, I think before I make my second and last point is that what you're actually agreeing to, what you're tacitly admitting, if you like, is that there is actually a prior objective claim of some kind that has a bearing on even morality itself. Do you know what I mean? So, and secondly, I would say this, that like the fact that even we had, like today's debate is a great example of this. If Nick had called us up and said, I want to have a YouTube episode debating which ice cream flavour is the right one and which one is wrong, and like anyone who believes that cookies and cream is the best flavour is a liar and they're a danger to the community, neither of us would participate. They would say this is crazy, unless it was a joke, right? We think this is ridiculous. But we don't think that way about moral claims. You and I have just had a debate of sorts, a dialogue. It's been really good. I've enjoyed it, by the way. But also the reason we are so passionate about this is because instinctively we know there is an argument to be had, because there is a truth at stake. Otherwise we would say this is just like ice cream flavours. There's no... And I don't think you really believe that way. I certainly don't. I don't think you walk out here and go, oh, well, I'm not going to bother attending any protest events or try and improve the world.
I can still
because it doesn't matter.
No, I'm saying I'm going with what I believe. I think it matters, but I don't think there's an objective truth telling me that it does matter. I think it matters. So to me it matters, and that's all that matters to me.
Fair enough.
Right, I might jump in here, lads, because I can see we could...
I was going to go, but I was like, no.
We're definitely set for a part two at some stage. But yeah, thank you very much to both of you for your time and effort on coming on to the podcast. I'm sure the listeners really appreciate it as well. I've loved hearing both of your points of view. I've learned a lot as well. So yeah, with that being said...
I loved it, Ray. It was great.
Yeah, thank you. You too. Yeah, I'm very happy with today.
Perfect.
And can I say too, because it was Ray was the one who really drove this idea of us getting together, and it was great. It was awesome.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, with that being said, thank you everybody for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to share it around and give it a rating on wherever you're listening to. And if you'd like to hear more from Brendan, then go to the Dispatches podcast or his Leftfoot Media YouTube account as well. But otherwise, we will see you on the next episode of The Garrison.